The hum of the nanoforge resonated beneath Eran's fingers as he carefully manipulated the streams of crystalline particles, weaving them into the intricate pattern forming before him. Outside his workshop Igloo, the eternal twilight cast deep, blue shadows across the icy landscape. Yet, within his sanctuary, the soft glow of his work illuminated the room with a gentle azure radiance. With practiced precision, he adjusted the molecular stabilizers, watching as the weapon core began to crystallize. This was no ordinary commission. It was not just another ornamental trinket for some off-world collector. No, this was a piece of art born out of necessity, a reminder of why he had chosen exile on this frozen world in the first place. His concentration was broken by a chime from the security sensors. Eran's sharp eyes flicked to the monitoring panel. Something large had breached the outer perimeter, triggering the thermal alarms. He cursed under his breath, carefully setting down his tools. "Display external feeds," he commanded. The holographic interface flickered to life, showing multiple angles of the barren ice field surrounding his compound. At first, all he saw was the usual whiteout conditions of a snowstorm. But then movement, a figure stumbling through the storm. Eran zoomed in, frowning. The figure's skin shimmered with a faint, purple luminescence, visible even through the thick snow. Not human. Not any species he recognized. The computer's analysis popped up. Life signs detected. Subject exhibits severe hypothermia. Cellular degradation imminent. Estimated survival time, without intervention, 12 minutes. Eran clenched his jaw. He had sworn never to get involved in another's problems. Not after what happened to his family. But the thought of someone freezing to death right outside his door, damn it. Activate emergency protocols. Prep the medical bay, he muttered, grabbing his thermal coat. He pulled on his protective gear and headed for the airlock. The moment he stepped outside, the bitter wind cut through him like knives. Even with his enhanced cold resistance, the storm was brutal. His helmet's thermal imaging flickered to life, and he quickly spotted the figure, now collapsed in the snow about 50 meters away. Eran trudged through the deep drifts, the howling wind swirling around him. As he drew closer, he saw her more clearly. Definitely female, with violet skin that pulsed weakly with bioluminescence. Her clothing was torn, frozen, and burned on one side. He crouched beside her, checking her pulse. It was weak but still there. "Hey, can you hear me?" Her eyes fluttered open, revealing irises that glowed faintly with inner light. "Help," she whispered, barely audible over the wind. "They're coming?" "Who's coming?" Eran demanded, but she had already lost consciousness again. Cursing under his breath, he scooped her up into his arms. She was surprisingly light, her skin ice cold against his chest despite the protective gear. As he turned to head back toward the shelter, something caught his eye, a faint shimmer in the storm, like heat distortion in the air. His tactical instincts, honed through years of warfare, screamed danger. He quickened his pace, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The security feeds had shown nothing else out there, but something about this felt wrong. The woman's wounds weren't just from the cold. She had been in a fight, and recently. They reached the airlock just as his sensors detected multiple incoming signatures at the edge of their range. The door sealed behind them with a reassuring hiss as the decontamination cycle began. "Computer, full lockdown. Activate all defensive systems," Eran commanded. "Acknowledged." Warning. Multiple unidentified vessels detected in high orbit. Eran glanced down at the unconscious woman in his arms. Her purple skin was now barely glowing at all. "What have you gotten me into?" he murmured. He carried her to the medical bay, laying her gently on the examination table. Up close, her beauty was even more striking. Her features were delicate but strong, and an intricate pattern swirled across her violet skin like star maps. But she was dying. Her core temperature dangerously low. "Computer, full biox scan," he ordered. The medical scanners hummed to life, bathing her in soft light. The results popped up. Subject exhibits severe hypothermia, multiple plasma burns, internal bleeding detected. Genetic structure unknown. No match in database. Eran carefully began removing her frozen outer garments, trying to access her wounds beneath. Begin emergency warming protocols. Prepare synthetic plasma for transfusion. As he worked, his trained eye noted details that raised more questions than answers. Her clothing, though damaged, was clearly military-grade. The burns weren't random. They formed distinct patterns. Close-range energy weapon fire. Someone had been trying to kill her. Suddenly, her eyes snapped open, glowing with panic. She grabbed his wrist with surprising strength. "The crystal," she gasped. "Is it safe?" "Easy," Eran said firmly, trying to keep her still. "You're safe here. I'm trying to help you." She searched his face intently, her luminous eyes seeming to peer into his very soul. "I'm Kira," she managed, her voice weak but musical. "You have to hide it." "Hide what?" Eran asked. "The crystal," she whispered, but she passed out again, her grip loosening. The monitor showed her vitals stabilizing, but just barely. Whatever she was running from, whatever she was trying to protect, would have to wait. Eran continued treating her injuries, his movements precise and efficient. As the hours passed, her condition slowly improved. Her natural bioluminescence began to grow stronger, and Eran found himself studying her face, noting how her expression shifted as she healed. He needed answers. Answers he hoped Kira would be able to provide once she woke. Eran sat in the sterile silence of the medical bay, staring at Kira's form on the examination table. The soft hum of the regenerators was the only sound, their glow casting a gentle light on her now stabilized body. She had been unconscious for hours, but the healing process was progressing steadily. Her skin had started to regain its faint violet hue, though it still flickered weakly in places, like a fading star. He leaned forward, studying her features intently. Those intricate patterns on her skin, like shifting constellations, still fascinated him. But the thing that intrigued him most was the crystal, the one she had mentioned in her delirium. What was it? And why was she so desperate to protect it? The moment she regained consciousness, he would find out. That was assuming she didn't slip into another coma. Her vitals, though stabilizing, were still precarious. The distant rumble of his security systems drew him back to the present. His interface buzzed, signaling another update. He tapped the screen, eyes narrowing as he scrolled through the information. The orbital vessels were still above, hovering ominously, their signatures now clearly hostile. Whoever they were waiting. He'd expected this. The moment he'd seen Kira's condition, he knew her arrival wasn't a coincidence. There was more to her story, and it had drawn the attention of whoever was in orbit. Sighing, Eran stood and walked to the medical bay's observation window. The blizzard outside had worsened, but it was the looming shadows above, cast by the ships above, that unsettled him the most. He couldn't hide here forever. If he was going to protect her, he'd need to understand who, or what, was after her. With a reluctant glance at Kira, still unconscious and breathing softly, Eran turned toward the control room. He would check the orbital scans again, maybe find something he had missed. He couldn't risk waiting too long. The hours stretched on as Eran pored over his data, his mind sharp and focused. The ships above had moved into formation, their positioning strategic. It was clear they were waiting for something, but what? Suddenly his wristcom buzzed. The alert was from his security system. Intruder detected, perimeter breach, east sector. His stomach dropped. Eran didn't hesitate. He was on his feet in an instant, already moving toward the airlock. The last thing he needed was for the situation to spiral further out of control. He grabbed his weapons and slipped them into place, adjusting his thermal mask over his face. His boots crunched through the ice as he reached the airlock, the control panel flickering green as it recognized his authorization. Activate defensive grid, Eran muttered to himself, the familiar weight of his weapons and armor grounding him. His hands moved with practiced precision as he armed the facility's perimeter defenses. A series of quick beeps signaled the completion of his actions. With a satisfied grunt, he checked the cameras, scanning for any sign of the intruders. Meanwhile, inside the medical bay, Kira's eyes fluttered open once again. This time, the dim glow of her violet irises was more pronounced, and her breath came in shallow gasps. Her surroundings were unfamiliar, and for a moment, Panic surged through her chest. Her memories were fragmented. Broken pieces of a life she could barely remember. The icy landscape, the fire, the crystal. She had to protect it. They would come for it. Her gaze swept the room, locking on Eran as he hurried past the open doorway, his attention focused on the security systems. She barely had the strength to sit up, but she pushed herself against the cold surface of the table. Her voice came out weak, like the last fragile breath of a dying star. Eran. He froze mid-step. His name on her lips sent a shock through him, and he quickly turned, rushing back to her side. "You're awake." His voice was filled with both concern and relief. Kira nodded slowly, the effort making her dizzy. Her hand instinctively went to her chest, to where she knew the crystal should be. It wasn't there. She frowned, looking up at him, her voice trembling as she whispered, "The crystal. Where is it?" Eran's brow furrowed, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he placed a gentle hand on her arm. "You need to rest. We'll figure this out. But you have to tell me everything." Kira shook her head weakly, struggling to sit up further. "I can't. They'll find me." Her voice broke as she spoke. "The crystal, it's not just a thing. It's a key. A key to something ancient. If they get it, who's they?" Eran pressed, his voice sharper now. He could hear the fear in her tone. It unnerved him more than he cared to admit. She didn't answer immediately, her head dropping as though the weight of her thoughts was too much. Then she looked at him, her violet eyes glistening with a mix of desperation and something deeper, something darker. "They're the ones who wiped out my people. They will come. They know where I am." "Who did this to you?" Eran asked, his voice low and steady. He moved closer, kneeling at her side. "I need to understand, Kira. What's happening?" Her hand, trembling, reached out to grasp his. The faint glow of her skin pulsed with intensity as she spoke in a near whisper. "You need to leave. Don't get involved. They'll destroy everything. I've seen it. They always find us. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Eran's heart pounded as he gazed down at her. His gut told him he couldn't turn back, not now. She was here for a reason. And the storm outside, along with the ships hovering above, told him that something far bigger than either of them was unfolding. "I won't leave you," Eran said quietly, determination in his voice. "We'll fight together." Kira's eyes narrowed, her grip on his hand tightening. "You don't understand. You can't. This is bigger than both of us." He didn't let go. "Then I'll understand when you're ready to tell me. But we face this together." For a long moment, Kira stared at him, as though weighing his words, before finally closing her eyes, her expression softening. It was a fleeting moment of peace before the storm, but it was enough. And then, with a voice laced with more sorrow than fear, Kira spoke. "The crystal is not just a weapon. It's a prison. A prison for something worse than you can imagine." Eran's mind raced as the pieces of the puzzle began to shift in his mind, but before he could ask her to elaborate, an alarm blared across the compound. The ships above had moved into position, and the ground shook as something massive broke through the ice. The real fight was about to begin. Eran's pulse quickened as the alarm screamed through the compound. The ground beneath him trembled slightly, an ominous reminder that whatever was coming, it was close. The system's visual feed flooded the room with urgent alerts. Multiple incoming signatures had locked into a precise location just outside the perimeter, rapidly approaching the ice wall that separated them from the vast frozen wasteland. Kira's hand tightened around his as her eyes fluttered open once more. This time, there was no confusion in her gaze, only sheer terror. "They found us," she whispered, her voice barely audible, but full of panic. "It's too late." Eran's breath caught in his throat. He could feel the weight of her words hanging in the air like a storm cloud, thick with inevitability. He didn't know who they were, but something about Kira's urgency made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. He stood up, pacing toward the terminal, his fingers flying across the interface, bringing up the security feed once again. The screen flickered, and the shadows of the ships hanging in orbit loomed large, like dark predators circling their prey. They were close, too close. "We need to move now," Eran said, his voice firm. Kira tried to sit up, wincing as her body groaned under the strain. No, you don't understand. Not now. Eran snapped, cutting her off as he rushed back to her side. They're coming for you, Kira. We don't have time for explanations. We need to get you somewhere safe. Her eyes softened for a moment, but there was an undeniable resolve in her voice as she took a shallow breath. You're not safe here, Eran. They'll take everything. Everything. He clenched his jaw and helped her sit up, noting the way she winced, clearly weakened from the ordeal. The healing process had made her color return, but there was still something wrong, something far deeper than just physical injury. The desperation in her eyes was clear. She was trying to protect him by pushing him away, but he wasn't going to leave her to face whatever nightmare she was running from. I'm not leaving you. We'll face this together, he said, pulling a jacket from the nearby rack and helping her into it. Her violet skin flickered with a faint glow, as though powered by sheer will alone, and she nodded slowly. Fine, but you need to understand what you're up against. The crystal, it's the key to everything. You won't be able to stop them with weapons. Eran shook his head, pulling her closer as they moved toward the main airlock. We'll figure that out later. Right now, I just need you to trust me. As they reached the door, he hesitated, turning to look at her one last time before sealing it behind them. Ready? Kira's eyes narrowed. She was already scanning the environment, her face hardening as she realized the situation was growing more dire by the second. I won't be a pawn in their game, Eran. I'll protect the crystal at all costs, even if I have to die doing it. Eran's heart clenched. Not if I have anything to say about it. The wind howled outside the compound as the two of them stepped into the biting cold. Eran's thermal suit shielded him from the worst of the storm, but the frozen air was still brutal on exposed skin. Kira's violet glow was a stark contrast to the whiteness around them, though her energy appeared faint, weaker with each passing minute. They made their way toward the transport bay, Eran's boots crunching in the deep snow. His fingers brushed against the interface for the security drones, activating them for perimeter defense. The air felt heavier as the seconds ticked by. Kira's body was almost limp in his arms, but she kept herself upright, determined to push forward. Eran's eyes flicked up to the sky, scanning the dark silhouettes of the ships above, waiting for a sign, something to tell him where the threat was coming from. Then it came. The ground rumbled beneath their feet as something massive moved beneath the ice. Without warning, the snow in front of them erupted in a geyser of ice and debris. Eran cursed under his breath as the massive shape emerged from the ground, a towering mechanical figure, its gleaming surface reflecting the dim light from above. It was followed by a squad of smaller, humanoid figures, encased in reflective armor. Get down! Eran shouted, shoving Kira behind a nearby ice mound for cover. The metallic giant's eyes glowed with a red hue as it locked onto their position. The smaller figures scattered, fanning out across the snow. Eran's heart raced as his instincts kicked in. These weren't just soldiers. They were hunters, programmed to track and eliminate with ruthless efficiency. His mind spun through escape plans, but Kira's voice cut through the chaos, her words like ice shards in the air. You need to destroy it. It's not a weapon, it's a... The sound of a crackling energy weapon broke off her sentence. Eran ducked as a blast of plasma narrowly missed them, vaporizing a chunk of ice where they'd been standing just moments before. Eran gritted his teeth and pulled Kira closer, his hand hovering over his weapon's trigger, but something told him shooting wouldn't be enough. They needed a plan, and fast. We have to get to the transport bay, he said urgently, looking around. We're not taking these guys down without some serious firepower. I'll handle them, Kira said, her voice colder now. The glow in her eyes brightened as her body seemed to draw on a deeper source of energy. Get me close enough. Eran didn't question her. He simply nodded, his hands working to pull Kira up as they made their way toward the transport. The sounds of combat reverberated through the storm, a low thrum beneath the chaos. The machines were closing in, but Kira's bioluminescence had begun to pulse in erratic patterns, as though reacting to something unseen. Wait! Eran shouted as he spotted the massive energy signature on his radar. His gaze snapped toward the sky as a beam of light pierced through the storm. One of the ships had launched something, a devastatingly powerful projectile heading straight for them. Kira's eyes locked onto the descending weapon, her face pale and set. "We have to destroy it now." With one final burst of energy, Kira extended her hand, her body glowing with a fierce, otherworldly light. The air around her shimmered as she unleashed a shockwave of force. The beam from the ship faltered, its trajectory skewing as the power of her energy distorted its path. "Do it now!" Kira shouted, her strength faltering. "We don't have much time." Eran moved with purpose, diving into the cockpit of the nearest transport ship and firing up the engines. He could hear Kira's labored breathing from the back of the ship, her body straining under the effort. With a roar of engines, the transport shot forward, blasting through the ice field with reckless speed. The first blast of plasma hit the ship's shields, but the impact barely slowed them down. Kira's control over the crystal was her final act of defiance, the only thing between them and annihilation. The battle was far from over. But for now, they were escaping, and Eran had no idea what lay ahead, what truth Kira was keeping from him. The deeper they ran, the more questions grew. But one thing was certain, there was no turning back now. The transport lurched as it shot across the snow, its engines roaring against the howling winds. The vehicle, a rugged, heavily modified craft designed to withstand the harshest conditions on this frozen world, screeched as it tore through the snowfields. Eran gripped the controls, eyes fixed on the dark horizon ahead. Behind him, Kira's breathing was shallow, her weakened form hunched against the wall, her bioluminescence pulsing weakly as if struggling to stay alive. "You need to rest," Eran said over his shoulder, his voice barely audible above the noise of the storm and the transport's thrumming engines. "We're almost to the caves, just hold on." Kira didn't respond, her hands trembling against her chest where the crystal should have been. She looked far away, like she was listening to something that only she could hear. The distant glow of the ships in orbit, still hovering ominously above, seemed to stretch into infinity. They were closing in. "You don't understand," Kira muttered, her voice shaky but urgent. "It's not just them. There's more. Much more. The crystal isn't just a key. It's a beacon." Eran's heart skipped a beat. "A beacon for what?" Kira turned to him, her violet eyes glowing faintly in the dim, icy light of the transport's cabin. "The crystal's power is older than anything you can imagine. It's a call, a summons. Once it's activated, it won't stop until they find it. And they'll stop at nothing to get their hands on it." The weight of her words pressed down on him like an avalanche. He tried to digest it, but the gravity of the situation was suffocating. He didn't know what kind of force could make Kira, someone who seemed so resolute, this afraid. Whatever it was, it had already destroyed her people. And now, it was coming for them. Eran's gaze flicked to the rear view. The blizzard outside was growing fiercer, but it wasn't the storm that made his stomach churn. In the distance, he saw the faint glimmer of the orbital vessels, their dark shapes barely visible through the snow. He slammed his fist down on the controls, steering the transport toward a narrow opening in the ice wall ahead. An ancient cave system, long forgotten by all but the most desperate survivors. "If they're coming for the crystal, then we need to hide it," Eran said, trying to steady his voice. "We need to buy time, keep it safe." Kira's eyes met his, full of a sorrow he couldn't comprehend. "It's not just about hiding it, Eran. If they get it, if they activate it, it will trigger a chain reaction. You won't be able to stop it, not even with your weapons. It's not just a beacon, it's a weapon. A weapon capable of destroying worlds." He felt the chill in his bones as Kira's words sank in, the realization dawning on him that what they were up against wasn't just some rogue faction or mercenary group. It was far worse. "Then what do we do?" Kira winced, the pain in her eyes clear, but there was also a spark of resolve, of something that could only come from someone who had already seen the end of their world and survived. "You don't just hide it. You destroy it." Eran's grip tightened on the wheel. The thought of destroying something so ancient, so powerful, was unthinkable. But if Kira was right, if the crystal was as dangerous as she claimed, then he didn't have a choice. The transport rattled violently as the wind outside battered it. But they were close now, close to the caves. He could feel the tremor of the ground beneath them, the sense that they weren't alone. "Hold on," Eran muttered, his voice barely audible. He pushed the throttle harder, willing the transport to move faster. The entrance to the caves loomed ahead, hidden beneath a curtain of ice and snow, barely visible to the untrained eye. But Eran knew the terrain. He had scouted these caves years ago, when the planet had been quieter. Now, they were his only hope. He managed to bring the transport into the cave entrance just as the storm reached a fever pitch. The cavern's interior was dark and cold, but at least it offered them some shelter from the relentless storm outside. He quickly disengaged the craft systems and moved toward the rear compartment to check on Kira. She was slumped against the wall, her face pale, but her eyes were wide with awareness. Despite her exhaustion, she seemed determined to keep going, to keep fighting. "We're safe for now," Eran said, moving to her side. "But I need to know everything, Kira. Everything about the crystal. How do we destroy it?" She shook her head slowly, her skin glowing faintly in the dark. "You can't destroy it. You can only hide it, Eran. Only one person in the universe has the power to do what's necessary, and it's not you." "Who?" Eran's voice was tight with frustration. "Who is it, Kira? You're not making sense. You said we could destroy it. Now you're telling me we can't." She closed her eyes, taking a moment before answering. "The last of my people, the ones who survived, left a hidden sanctuary, a place where the crystal was originally forged. Only there can it be destroyed, but even then the process is dangerous. It's not something you could do casually." Eran stared at her, trying to wrap his head around what she was saying. "So we just need to get to this sanctuary, then?" Kira nodded, though it was clear from her expression that even she wasn't sure they could make it. The sanctuary is located in the heart of the frozen wastes, far beyond any settlement or safe zone. And it's not just the crystal they want. It's me. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "I'm the last one who knows the way. I'm the last one who can stop them." Eran's eyes narrowed. "Then we're going to have to get you there." A sharp crack echoed from deep within the cave, followed by a low, rumbling tremor. Eran stiffened, instinctively reaching for his weapon. "Did you hear that?" Kira's face went pale, her eyes wide with fear. "They're here." The ground rumbled again, louder this time. The sound of metal scraping against rock reverberated through the cavern. Eran's heart raced. They hadn't come this far, only to be stopped now. He grabbed Kira by the arm, his grip firm but not harsh. "We're not going down without a fight. Stay close." As the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, Kira's bioluminescent skin flickered, and her voice was barely a whisper. "If they find us, if they get the crystal, it will be the end of everything." Eran's breath caught in his throat as the cave entrance shuddered, the first of many shadowy figures stepping into view. The fight for survival had just begun. The cavern trembled again as the figures approached, their footsteps echoing with a heavy, metallic rhythm that vibrated through the ice. Eran's pulse spiked, adrenaline surging as he scanned the darkened expanse of the cave entrance, trying to make out their shapes. The shadows were long and sinister, their edges blurry, distorted by the flickering light from Kira's dim bioluminescence. "They're getting closer," Kira whispered, her voice laced with fear. Her hand trembled in his as she struggled to stand, her knees weak from the energy she'd expended earlier. The crystal, still hidden beneath her torn clothes, pulsed faintly beneath her skin, almost as if it sensed the danger too. Eran's mind raced. He had to think. They couldn't stay here, not with those hunters closing in. His eyes flicked over to the transport, still humming in the background with its minimal systems still active, offering a small hope for escape. But they couldn't take the transport and run. The cave was far too narrow, and the noise would attract even more of their pursuers. His gaze turned back to Kira. Her fear was palpable, but there was also something else, something powerful and ancient hidden within her, something connected to the crystal. "We need to leave. Now." Eran's voice was steady, despite the panic trying to claw its way up his throat. "There's a back route to the old mining tunnels through here. It's the only chance we've got." Kira's eyes widened, a sharp breath escaping her lips. "You don't understand. The miners, they left this place long ago. There's nothing in those tunnels but death. We don't have a choice," Eran insisted, helping her to her feet despite her protests. The tremors in the ground were growing stronger. It was clear they had mere minutes before the first of their pursuers found them. He guided her through the labyrinth of ice and stone, moving swiftly but quietly. The entrance to the tunnels was narrow, nearly hidden by layers of ice that had settled over it like a forgotten memory. Eran's hands worked fast, clearing away the ice, until the faint, stale air of the old shafts rushed out to meet them. It smelled of decay and old earth, a reminder of the lost civilization that had once called this frozen world home. But there was no time to dwell on history now. The sounds of footsteps were growing louder, closer. Kira's grip on him tightened, her fear now mixed with something else, desperation. "Do you know how to navigate these tunnels?" Eran asked, glancing down at her. I should," she said, her voice strained. "But we need to be careful. The tunnels shift. If we don't know the right paths, we'll end up lost, trapped." He swallowed hard. "Then we'll take it slow, one step at a time." They stepped into the darkness, the air in the tunnels thick and cold, the faintest echoes of their footsteps reverberating through the rock. Eran held the edge of his weapon close, scanning every shadow that stretched in front of them. The light from Kira's body barely illuminated the way, but it was enough to keep them moving forward. Minutes passed, and the further they went, the more the tunnels seemed to close in on them. It was claustrophobic, the walls pressing and like the earth itself was trying to swallow them. Every so often, Kira would stop, her hand on the wall, eyes flickering with that eerie glow as if trying to sense something in the dark. "I can feel them," she murmured. "They're closer." Eran's breath hitched. He could feel it too, the unsettling pressure, the way the air seemed to grow heavier with each step. Suddenly, Kira froze, her entire body tensing. Her head snapped around, her violet eyes wide with horror. "No!" Before Eran could react, the ground beneath them shook violently, throwing them both off balance. The walls cracked and splintered, and a deafening roar echoed from somewhere deep within the tunnel. "Kira!" Eran shouted, grabbing her arm, pulling her back toward the deeper part of the tunnel. But Kira couldn't move. Her eyes were locked on something, her body rigid with terror. "It's here," she whispered, her voice thick with dread. "They found us." A massive shadow loomed in the entrance of the tunnel, its shape barely visible through the dust and debris that cascaded down from the ceiling. A cold, mechanical hiss filled the air, followed by the sound of boots clanking against the stone floor. It was them, the hunters. Their leader stepped into view, towering and imposing, clad in gleaming black armor that reflected the faint light. His face was obscured by a helmet, but the way he moved, like a predator tracking its prey, sent a chill down Eran's spine. "Move!" Eran barked, but Kira remained still, staring at the figure with a look of disbelief. "Kira, we have to run." "They're too strong," Kira whispered, barely able to find her voice. "We can't outrun them, Eran. They'll kill us." The leader of the hunters raised his hand, signaling to the others to hold their position. "She knows too much," he said, his voice cold and mechanical. "The crystal must be retrieved." Eran's heart pounded. This was it. This was the moment he had feared, the moment Kira's past would catch up with them. "Kira," Eran said, his voice low and desperate. "Tell me what to do. I won't let them take you." She turned to him, her eyes reflecting an inner turmoil that cut through him like a blade. She was trembling, her strength fading, but she managed to nod. "You have to destroy the crystal. It's the only way to stop them." Eran's breath hitched. "But there's no time for second guesses." She cut him off, her voice stronger now, desperate. "If you don't, they will use it to kill everything. Everything you've ever known. Everything you care about." With a final, lingering look, Kira reached into her chest, her hands shaking as she grasped the crystal that had brought them both to this moment. The faint glow in her skin grew brighter, almost blinding. And then, with a flick of her wrist, the crystal shattered. Eran barely had time to register what happened before the ground shook with an overwhelming force. A blinding light erupted from the fragments, filling the entire tunnel with an energy so intense, it felt like the very fabric of space was unraveling around them. No, the leader of the hunters screamed, but it was too late. The energy from the crystal surged outward, consuming everything in its path. The hunters cried out in horror as the tunnel collapsed, the echoes of their screams swallowed by the overwhelming power of the crystal's destruction. Eran felt himself pulled away, thrown backward by the shockwave. He hit the ground hard, darkness swallowing him whole. When Eran finally opened his eyes, the world was silent. The once chaotic vibrations had ceased. The only sound was his own shallow breathing. He slowly sat up, pain shooting through his body. But Kira was gone. The crystal had taken her. And in its wake, there was nothing but cold, endless silence. The cave was still, save for the cracks in the walls where the crystal's energy had torn through. The storm outside had quieted, the blizzard now a faint memory. The world seemed to be holding its breath. Eran stood, looking at the remains of the tunnel, the destruction wrought by the crystal's final act. And he understood. It was over. The hunters were gone, but so was Kira, and the universe was forever changed.